For 1,000 years, travelers have been falling in love with Venice. It has been celebrated by poets, painters, composers, and in countless love letters. What is it that gives Venice so powerful a hold on the world's imagination and affections? This is not an idle question. Putting aside for the moment the city's great beauty and sensuous appeal, there is something here the modern world has lost entirely. A manageable human scale, unity with diversity, a place where people can move on hundreds of paths without a slackening of pleasure, a warmth and vitality we need to recapture. Venice lies in the great lagoon at the north end of the Adriatic, a watery waste of over 200 square miles, filled with silt from the Alpine rivers, and threaded with a maze of twisting channels, difficult, even dangerous to navigate, and by the same token, a refuge. After the fall of Rome, early in the 5th century, a series of barbarian invasions from the north began destroying the old Roman towns of the Veneto. Many of the surviving inhabitants fled east into the marshes. Even then, the lagoon was not entirely uninhabited. A century earlier, a Roman historian reported, "They live like marsh birds in nests of reeds raised on piles." This formula, invented by the prehistoric lake dwellers of Middle Europe, is shown here in a modern reconstruction on Lake Constance. Venice did not happen overnight. After the first waves of refugees, it took a full 200 years to establish a base on the island of Torcello. A later move took the city to Malamocco, way down at the southern tip of the dunes, for the people were still fearful of an attack from the mainland. In the 9th century, an attack did come, but from a French fleet in the Adriatic. The Venetians decoyed the French into the lagoon and destroyed the stranded ships when the tide went out. Despite this victory, they moved again, this time back into the lagoon to Rivo Alto, a deep channel in a cluster of about 100 islands. These developments took 4 centuries, from the 5th to the 9th, a very long time even for the slow-moving Dark Ages. An infrastructure gradually took form: fishing, salt gathering, subsistence gardening, trading with the mainland, and boat building. From the beginning, the city enjoyed a natural canal system between the islands. Their edges were gradually stabilized by driving wood piles. The ancient method is still used on occasional odd jobs. Venice is an open city with broad vistas, an atmosphere totally unlike that of the walled towns of the period. No fortifications were needed. The lagoon was protection enough. But aside from the absence of walls, it was a medieval city, a disorderly rabbit warren of alleys, streets, and canals. It is largely a synthetic city, resting on millions of piles. It is a fragile city, protected from the sea only by a thin line of dunes, without which, a 16th century visitor observed, the waves would utterly deface and destroy the city in a moment. In November 1966, it almost happened. Torrential rains flooded the rivers. High winds drove the Adriatic waters to the north, while unusually high tides breached the dunes, pouring 6 feet of water throughout the city. The Venetians had lived for centuries in this water world of shifting outlines and indeterminate distances. Under an immense sky constantly changing color, a mirror world lacking solid forms and sharp shadows. No people could fail to modify their perceptions after 4 centuries of exposure to such an environment, and the city reflects this conditioning process. Venetian Gothic, the city's great architectural invention, consists of thin colored facades, often perforated like lace, with no significant three-dimensional form. The Grand Canal is a stage set made up of these surfaces set edge to edge. The visual message throughout is weightlessness. The Doge's Palace is a large box resting on 2 stories of arcades. The box has a marble skin, but the stone is laid up to suggest a woven fabric, not a real wall. The illusion is reinforced by the twisted marble ropes at the corners, which look as if they were stitched to the adjoining walls. Many views suggest painted backdrops. The smallest piazza is pure theater, with all the scenery in place for Act 1. When the lights go down, figures slip out of the shadows. Portia enters stage right. One of the strange things about this city is that Venice has always been the quintessence of a bourgeois city, created by hard-fisted men of business who cared greatly about their profits and were not always entirely scrupulous about the way they made them. And yet it was these men who created the loveliest, most delicate, most exquisitely romantic of cities. Another extraordinary fact is that Venice, at the peak of its wealth and power, the greatest maritime nation of the Western world, was a city of barely 1,200 acres with a population under 200,000. But by the middle of the 15th century, Venice was headed for deep trouble. The treasury had been drained by the long wars with Genoa and the Turks. She lost her hold on Constantinople, and Vasco da Gama's discovery of a sea route from Portugal to India ended her monopoly of trade with the Orient. The long, slow decline began. The 19th century travelers who came saw only decay, faded beauties, a dying city. And today, of the 10,000 gondolas which once plied her canals in the 16th century, only about 400 remain. Her population has declined by 60,000 since the flood of 1966. And every November, the waters rise above the embankments. The economy now relies mainly on tourism. An incredible 7 million visitors annually. They come for a day or two, fill the piazza like wall-to-wall carpeting, jam the bridges, stand in sluggish clusters around their guides, pose for snapshots, stare in shop windows as they shuffle by, dreaming of non-existent bargains, and go home with their shoddy souvenirs. This massive invasion from March to October is in large part a reflection of the evocative power of the city's symbols. The gondola, for instance, is seen only in Venice. But who does not know what a gondola looks like? The tourists on its arch bridges take pictures of other bridges, some of which, like the Bridge of Sighs, are encrusted with legends. These symbols are known the world over. The Winged Lion of St. Mark, the Piazza. Napoleon called it the greatest drawing room in Europe. The Grand Canal, the most beautiful street anywhere. The domes and mosaics of the Basilica, pure magic. Of all the legendary cities, Venice is what is left, possibly the greatest collective artwork ever produced. And anatomy, for all its analytical virtues, has no way of bringing life to the organism it examines. Consider luck, for instance. Moving into the lagoon was an act of desperation, but it turned out to be an ideal place for a great trading nation, with open water to the east and a clear path to the west through the plains of Lombardy. Venice escaped feudalism because it had no land. It established a republic in a world of serfdom. The result was an explosion of creative energy impossible in a closed feudal society. Trade brought the Venetians into close contact with unfamiliar peoples. It led to the most rigorous training for the sons of patricians in navigation, banking, and diplomacy. Few societies had a ruling class so disciplined, hard-working, and sophisticated. Finally, as the city prospered, the old dreams of going home to the mainland faded, to be replaced by a pride and love of great intensity which was felt at all social levels. Every trader came back from his voyages with something special for his mistress, La Serenissima. The rare marbles on the basilica, the ancient sculptures, the golden horses, even the bones of the saints, all these things were their love offerings to the city. Now the lovers of Venice come in late fall and winter, when the beautiful old place is quiet. They come during this chill and dismal season, drawn not only by nostalgia, but also by the unconscious fear that each visit may be the last. For this is not just a uniquely beautiful place. Venice is the last great city built to the measure of man.